Today is Friday, March 13th, 1964. Both sides in the Jack Ruby trial have rested their case. The high point of the trial is upon us. The lawyers make their final arguments to the jury. I'm Eric Bushman.
And I'm Brandon Birmingham. This is the state of Texas versus Jack Ruby, the original trial of the century. It's been a week and 2 days since everything began. The jury has heard hours of testimony from Dallas police officers who saw Jack Ruby shoot Lee Harvey Oswald. Many of them claimed Ruby said that he hoped Oswald would die. That becomes key on the charge that Ruby is guilty of murder with malice. Members of the local media and others who knew Ruby took the stand to offer what they knew about the nightclub owner. His love for attention, his desire to be where the action is, and that he could very quickly become emotional. That is important for the main defense argument that Ruby suffered from psychomotor epilepsy when he jumped forward after walking down the basement ramp to shoot Lee Harvey Oswald.
While the lawyers involved on both sides of the trial have asked their pointed questions, they now have the painstaking task of turning over a week's worth of testimony into an argument. Each will argue their side. They will take the answers from the witnesses and craft the witnesses' words into why the jury should come to a certain conclusion. But before the lawyers in the case make their closing arguments, the jury must be charged. They have to be told what they can consider and what they cannot. Most of the day will be spent with Judge Joe Brown going over the charge with District Attorney Henry Wade and his team, and Defense Counsel Melvin Belli, Joe Tannehill, and their team. This drags on into the afternoon and then into the evening.
Finally, the jury is given the instructions in the jury charge in the state of Texas versus Jack Ruby. Now comes the time when the attorneys stand up and present their closing arguments. Each side will take turns. Different attorneys will make the points they have studied. All of this is to convince the jury that each side is right. Let's go into the courtroom now. Eric Bushman is standing by.
It's a quiet yet very tense feeling inside the courtroom where nearby every seat is taken up by a journalist. This, by the way, is not Judge Brown's assigned courtroom. His is much smaller. But because of the obvious international interest in the case, he has been given a courtroom that can fit about 3 times as many people as his. This city has been rocked over the past 4 months, and Dallasites finally see a light at the end of a very dark tunnel. This trial could mark the end to a tragic story: the assassination of a president, wounding of a governor, and murder of a police officer. The man accused of firing those shots himself gunned down while surrounded by police. And now the sole survivor of all of that mess will soon know if he gets sent to an asylum or sent to the electric chair. Looks like Prosecutor Bill Alexander is about to speak to the jury, which has been waiting patiently all day for the lawyers and Judge Brown to come up with the jury charge. The jury elected to hear arguments this evening. It's 8 o'clock, and Bill Alexander is on his feet.
From the time of the entire event, the time of the shooting, from the time Jack Ruby moved out of that crowd and ducked his left shoulder, coming out, less than 20 seconds. Now that's fast, folks. Officer McMillan told you how when they were in the jail office that, well, he told you that he heard, "You rat son of a bitch, you shot the president." You know that word rat is not strange to Jack Ruby's vocabulary because he used that to his psychiatrist. Do you recall him telling you how he referred to Oswald as a rat? After they got him in the jail office, he said, "I hope I killed that son of a bitch." As they got off the elevator, Ruby said, "I meant to shoot 3 times, but you guys stopped me." So the defendant had perfect recall. He knew what he was doing. There's no question about fugue or epilepsy or any one of these weird psychomotor variants that they seem to have developed for this man. Officer Archer, who brought Ruby into the jail office from the left, he told you that he heard the word "son of a bitch" just before the shot was fired, that there was a scuffle, that he got a hold of Ruby's left arm, and they went into the jail office, and he estimated from the time of the shot into the office was 12 seconds. He said when they got Ruby's face down on the floor in the jail office, that he said, "I am Jack Ruby. You guys know me." At least he knew who he was. I hope I killed that son of a bitch. He was on the jail floor. Archer told you that when they got off the jail elevator, he said, "Jack, I think you killed him." And Jack Ruby replied to him and said, "I intended to shoot him 3 times. You know that Captain King in the jail office there, before the elevator, he heard Ruby say, "You didn't think I was going to let him get by with it, did you?" And I assume by letting him get by with it, that he was referring to shooting the president and escaping punishment. Now, ladies and gentlemen, that is the case right there. No question about the defendant being the man that did the killing. The only question, if there is a question, there's none in my mind, is malice and intent. Now, how much more malice do you need to have murder? Isn't this the kind of thing that law was intended to prevent? Here we have the spectacle of a manacled man. I have seen enough to know that at any time a jury is considering a murder case, the first question they are going to ask is, should the deceased have departed? I know that. I'm not going to defend Oswald to you, but I'll tell you this. American justice is on trial. American justice had Oswald in its possession. The Dallas Police Department had Oswald in its possession. Oswald was entitled to the protection of the law until the law no longer to protect him and to punish him. Oswald was a living, breathing American citizen. Whatever he may have done, he was entitled to be tried in a court of justice, just like you, Jack Ruby, who was his judge, his jury, his executioner. You denied him the very thing that you demand through your lawyer the loudest. Jack Ruby killed a man in handcuffs. We know that due process of law was taking effect because Oswald was handcuffed between the officers. We know from the testimony that charges had been filed. He was being transferred from the city jail to the county jail. Now, don't tell me it takes guts to shoot a man that is manacled. It doesn't. My goodness, how horrible can an act be when you realize that he has shot a man who is in the hands of the law, who is handcuffed? Don't talk about sporting. There is no sport in that. Now, if Jack Ruby had wanted to cut somebody up and shot it out with him, cut it out with him, standing toe to toe, tie their hands together, cut it out, fight it with fists, that's something else. But my friends, you can't tell me that shooting a handcuffed man does not show the kind of a mind and heart, regardless of social duty and fatally bent on mischief. There is just no excuse for that sort of thing. That is Judge Lynch at its worst. That is the thing. The very thing our law is designed to prevent. For over 200 years, we have tried to establish a government that we can be proud of. We have tried to eliminate the lynch law. We have tried to exact punishment under the law, under proper surroundings like this, under a proper judge, before a jury, people like you, so that justice may be done. Lee Harvey Oswald didn't get justice. Now, I am not going to try to defend him, but I will say this. Lee Harvey Oswald loved life, and he had a right to draw every breath that God and Dallas County government, the government of Texas, and the United States government would let him draw. Lee Harvey Oswald cannot be recalled. He is dead. He is silent. And the Lord alone knows what secret went to the grave with him.
Well, Bill Alexander looks confident as he walks back to the prosecutor's desk in the courtroom. Now we expect that lead prosecutor, District Attorney Henry Wade, is not going to speak until at the end of their presentation. The defense will begin shortly. And Brandon, what were your takeaways?
Alexander makes the point that malice or premeditation doesn't take days or weeks of planning. He argued it can happen in the blink of an eye. Also that Ruby had to be around Lee Harvey Oswald. the unnatural wanting on behalf of Jack Ruby to be around the presidential assassin. Remember, he was seen in the assembly room of the Dallas Police Department, and some might argue Ruby was stalking him. Then he shows up on November 24th in the basement, and the rest is history. Are we coming up on the defense's first argument?
Well, it seems so. Looks like Phil Burleson is about to kick off the defense's close. Here he is now.
Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I too want to add my thanks to that of Mr. Alexander, who preceded me, for your attention during the trial, though it has been a long trial. We who sit on this side over here, we observe, we look, we see that you have been paying attention, and we, I personally speaking both for myself, Mr. Ruby, for my co-counsel, appreciate the attention. I want to first, as I speak on behalf of Jack Ruby here to you now, answer, if I may, and if I can, some of the statements made by the prosecutor, Mr. William F. Alexander, a man you have seen during this trial in action. I want you to listen, or better, reason with me as we discuss some of the things he has brought up, and let us check the validity of the statements he made, not in an attempt to attack Mr. Alexander. No, nothing personal. After this trial is over, Mr. Alexander and I will still be friends. But let's do it because it's necessary to a just end result so that you won't be misled by statements and conclusions by these lawyers. Let us look at the facts. Let us take some of them. I won't be able to make each and every statement that he made, but I do want to take some that caught my attention. I want to mention some. Now, he made a big to-do about the fact of not going to the parade. We didn't ask you because we were not allowed to on Vaudeville, whether or not each of you went to the parade. We don't know whether or not you were working, as Jack Ruby was, as the evidence shows. We don't know that. They challenged this patriotism to the president, who the evidence later shows he grieved over. Search your minds. Did you go to the parade? Did your wife? Did your mother go? Did your father go? Did your children go? Someone in there, I'm sure you will find someone who did not go. And then after you have finished your jury duty, go home and tell them that they weren't patriotic. Or say to yourself that you weren't patriotic. Say that you had to be someplace else. The evidence shows, the state's evidence, mind you, the state's witness, not one that we brought to you, but the state's evidence shows that Jack Ruby was at the Dallas News. And what else does it show? It shows that he was a man who was running a business and he did his own layouts. We also know from the state's witness that there were certain deadlines that had to be met. We know that these deadlines was 12 o'clock or approximately for the space. And I think the evidence shows, you will recall it, somewhere around 1 o'clock was for the actual layout had to be in. Now this is their evidence. Jack Ruby was working, and yet in a feeble attempt to attack Jack Ruby before you, 12 intelligent jurors and citizens of this county, they pick on something that simple. Question yourselves, your friends, and your loved ones. Now, he said that they were. Jack Ruby was following this Lee Harvey Oswald around, down here, up at the city hall. Something about the sandwiches for homicide, and trying to get in there where Lee Harvey Oswald was. And then the evidence puts Jack Ruby in the same room with Lee Harvey Oswald. But what did Mr. Alexander tell you? Review back the testimony. There were a lot of people in there. Do you remember Sam Pete? He came in here and testified. He was there. So was Mr. Wade up there at this news conference? What did he tell you? He told you that Jack Ruby was standing on a table. What else did he tell you? He waved to Mr. Wade as Mr. Wade was looking, the only one not looking at Lee Harvey Oswald. And finally, what else did Sam Pete tell you? He told you that the position of Jack Ruby standing on the table was such that he could have shot him that night. There was other evidence that Jack had his pistol on his person Friday night when Oswald was there. Again, ladies and gentlemen, to me, as I view the testimony, and I hope that you view it, a very weak effort to try to show something that really wasn't there. To show something that really wasn't there. He said that it is an incriminating sign that Jack Ruby wanted to be where this Lee Harvey Oswald was, wanted to see him, be around him. The man who was charged with the assassination of the President of the United States on the streets of Dallas County. No, I personally wouldn't want to see him. But then again, it might be a piece of history, something to remember. To see that person, something to be seen. So is it so bad that this man might have wanted to see a piece of history? No, I say to you that it is again another feeble effort trying to go back and piece the malice that is not there and put it in there. Because Jack Ruby lived in Dallas. Lee Harvey Oswald was killed here in Dallas. Another circumstance. Feeble, feeble, feeble. Then he said something about where was this George Senator and this Larry who had the blinking eyes, making fun of a witness because of some type of defect. Where were they that morning? Because there was a conflict. He told you on one hand the police officers can't remember everything that happens up there at City Hall that day. And yet he criticizes because there is a legitimate conflict. Is there anything important about the conflict in the testimony? Or whether Jack was up at the Times Herald at 4 o'clock, or whether he was with them? I'll tell you this. I'll submit this to you for some consideration. Again, some feeble type of evidence. Suspicion. It's not evidence. Just another attempt to try to drive the nail in harder. To try to say that Jack, George, and Larry were up to something they shouldn't have been. But let me tell you. You heard the questioning by the prosecutors over here during the trial. You heard them refer to the FBI. You told the FBI this. You told the FBI that. You told the FBI this, didn't you? Well, let me say this to you. If there was any question where Jack was, and Larry was, and George was, I'll submit to you that it is a reasonable deduction from what you have seen and heard that the FBI would have had a report, and it would have been in their hands, and they would have been able to come up with something. But they didn't, and that's important. They didn't, and they are trying to use that as evidence against Jack Ruby as he sits here on trial. Then one of the crowning glories of Mr. Alexander, as he talked with you, was when he was criticizing Doyle Lane in the telegram, that he might have left it around there while he made some change and maybe waited on another customer. I point out to you and want you to see that this is State's Exhibit number 4. You recall earlier in the testimony in this trial who it was that called Doyle Lane as a witness. It wasn't the defense. Who was it? Mr. Alexander, the State. They proved up the time. It was their witness, and they are bound by his testimony, except that they can try to throw some doubt into it. Another feeble, yes, feeble attempt to conjure up some malice, as they call it. that wasn't there. And we're going to get to malice. You know, the only malice in this case comes from the blistering lips of some police officers who did not even make reports of what they saw and heard. The biggest crime in the world, they're now saying, the biggest crime, travesty on justice, being shot while handcuffed. These officers up there are the only people who put malice in this case, didn't even put in their report to their chief the things they testified to down here. Now, one last thing I want to mention that Mr. Alexander talked about was what this McMillan heard. I think McMillan's been pointed out in this defense exhibit number 14 as being this man's right here, looking the other direction. As Jack was up there, the picture was made immediately before the shot, and that's when you heard this. You rat son of a bitch. You shot the president. Well, right along about the end of the trial, you heard where the word son of a bitch came from. Detective Combs came in and told you he said it before the shot, or at the time of the shot. It wasn't Jack Ruby. Here's Detective Combs, over here behind Lavelle. Here's McMillan, over here behind Graves. That's where it came from. You now know. If it didn't, why didn't Ike Pappas hear it? He was standing next to Jack. Why didn't Graves hear it? He was right there next to Jack. This is Graves. Here's Ike Pappas. There's Lavelle. Why didn't they hear it if it was Jack? Because it didn't happen. Now, what were some of the things the evidence shows that were in Jack's mind? What was this man that Mr. Alexander would not tell you all about, was charged with the assassination of the president, charged with killing a police officer on your streets, wounding your governor? This is the Lee Harvey Oswald that we knew about. We remembered it. And Jack remembered it on those 3 or 4 days back in November that were very tragic. These things, as you reconstruct, as you paint this picture of those days, these are the things the court's talking about in paragraph 12. Now, the last part of the charge, the part on insanity, will be covered by my friends and colleagues, Mr. Belli and Mr. Tannehill. The only other part I want to discuss with you is on the last page of this charge, and that is this last, or next to last paragraph. In there, the court tells you that the defendant is presumed to be innocent until his guilt is established by legal evidence beyond a reasonable doubt. And in case you have a reasonable doubt as to the defendant's guilt, you will acquit him and say by your verdict, not guilty. The court is just telling you, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, each individually and collectively, that if you have a reasonable doubt as to any element of the case, or as to any part of the case, then you will resolve that doubt in favor of the defendant. And the last point, the court tells you, you are the exclusive judges of the credibility of the witnesses and the weight to be given to the testimony. Now, in that regard, consider the inconsistency of the witnesses as they tried to please their superior, the police officer witnesses, their bosses, the district attorneys, the ones they handled with during the noon hour. Just think back as you do as to the testimony in this regard. I'm not saying that policemen tell stories, but I am saying in this instance, in this case, happening in their own backyard, in breach of their security, and this man is down here prosecuting the man who broke that security. Take all this into consideration. Weigh it as you weigh the testimony and I feel that you will come to a just verdict. Thank you for your attention.
All right, we're really getting underway here. The night is setting in, and it doesn't seem like we're going to be taking a break anytime soon. These lawyers will be going well into the night because this jury is ready to wrap this up. Now it looks like Prosecutor Frank Watts is coming up. Let's hear what he has to say.
May it please the court, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, it is my purpose to answer, if I can, the arguments that have been made by defense counsel preceding me, and to say something as I see it on behalf of the people of the state of Texas. You've heard Jack Ruby was not patriotic because we showed you in the evidence that he did not attend the parade, that while the parade was going on, while the president was going down past this building and around this corner to my left, that Ruby was over here at the Dallas News. Why? Well, defense counsel says there was a deadline to meet. I don't know of any reason that a man who runs a nightclub couldn't put his ad in the paper in the morning if he really intended to see the president, if he had such love for the president. But it doesn't make any difference about that at all. There are a good many people in Dallas County who had love for the president, and there were a good many people who did turn out and see the president. And there were a good many people who did turn out and see the parade. And I don't know of anyone who tried to kill Lee Harvey Oswald who loved the president, other than Jack Ruby. Then defense counsel says, well, what about his attendance in City Hall? He complains that that matter is brought out. I say to you, that's where he first conceived the idea of taking the life of Lee Harvey Oswald. That's where Ruby saw what he later described as a sneering, smirking face, and it instilled in his heart a desire to kill that man, and to kill him at the first opportunity he had. And if this was a case of killing a psychomotor epilepsy, I say that all the elements necessary to trigger such a thing, if it can be done, existed here. But no, that is where the thought was formed, and he later found the opportunity to carry out that very idea. Then Ruby says these words, son of a bitch. And I apologize to you and to everybody in this courtroom for using these words, but I'm going to talk about the case before me. Defense counsel says that these words, son of a bitch, came from Combest. Well, that doesn't happen to square with the evidence. The evidence is this. Combest did use the words, but he also saw Jack Ruby's lips moving. Now, defense counsel would have you believe that the person who was present in a state of confusion should be able to tell you what every other person said. Could you have done that had you been there? Could you tell what every person said in a state of confusion? While you were sitting here listening to this case, as you saw 4, 5, or 6 lawyers on their feet at one time, all of them talking to His Honor Judge Brown, could you tell what each one of them was saying? If you were called upon as a witness, could you tell what Mr. Wade said, what Mr. Alexander said, what Mr. Belli said, or so on? No. But if you happen to be looking at one, if you happen to notice one, you could perhaps tell what one said. But in a state of confusion, you could not tell what everybody said. Then defense counsel said, this may be a case of murder without malice. Now let me tell you this. In this charge, that murder without malice is still an intentional killing. This is still an intentional act wrongfully done. So I say to Mr. Burleson, has the defense abandoned the psychomotor epilepsy defense? Have we now gone on to intentional killing? Is that where we are? Is that what you meant? And then defense counsel complains because the district attorney talked to witnesses before the case was brought to trial. I say to you in all candor that if Mr. Wade or anyone working with him would bring witnesses into this court and ask a jury to return a verdict of death without having talked to any of those witnesses, that he would be derelict of his duty. How could you in good conscience, if you were Mr. Wade, come down here and ask the jury to vote the death penalty unless you knew what the facts were before you came into this courtroom? You find out the facts by talking to the witnesses. Now in this case, the indictment is one of murder with malice, and to this the defendant has pled not guilty. And after the evidence was developed by the defense in this case, they sought to show you that he was not guilty by reason of insanity. And throughout this case, throughout the trial, you have heard witnesses here who are psychiatrists and psychologists. It so happens that in this state, the test of whether or not a person is insane is this. Do you know the difference between right and wrong? Do you know the nature and consequences of your act? This is a simple rule devised by God-fearing people in the state of Texas. It so happens that no matter how many psychiatrists come into this court, no matter how many days of testimony you have regarding mental conditions, that when the final word is said, it will be the 12 persons who sit on your seats, on your side of the rail, 12 laymen, if you please, the 12 citizens of Dallas County who will have the final say as to whether or not a person is sane. Whether the person knew the difference between right and wrong, whether the person knew the nature and consequences of his act. The law says that you, as citizens, you as laymen, will make that decision, and contemplates that you come into this courtroom with your common sense. It so happens that there was evidence in this case that points out that this man was emotional. It points out that he was high-tempered. It points out that he had many characteristics of that nature which are not common to all people. But we go right back to the charge in this case, and you will find in that charge that Judge Brown, in all his wisdom, has defined to you malice. And in that charge, he tells you what malice is. And he says that malice is a condition of the mind that shows a heart regardless of social duty and fatally bent upon mischief. Yea, as a man thinketh, so is he. And out of the fullness of the heart are the issues of life. That we have known since the Holy Writ was given to us. And how do you determine this? The law says that malice may be inferred from acts done and words spoken. So with this in mind, with that background, let us look now at what was done and what was said, in order that we may find in our humble way if Ruby had malice in his heart. We know from the evidence that Ruby was interested in when Lee Harvey Oswald was going to be transferred from the jail. We know that even the day before he was actually transferred, Ruby was over here on Houston Street. We know he had been up there Friday night at City Hall. What was he doing? We know on that fatal Sunday morning that, armed as he was with a fully loaded gun, Ruby went down the ramp into the basement of that same City Hall where he had no business to be. We know that he went around to the end of the line of people, just like the Germans skirted the end of the Maginot Line. And without saying anything, revealing his identity or his presence at the time, pulls up 2 steps and thrusts a gun into the abdomen of Lee Harvey Oswald. And what does he say? He says, "You rat son of a bitch, you shot the president." That's what the law means when it talks about acts done and words spoken. What was the act done? The act was murder of a man who was manacled to a police officer. And what were the words spoken? "You rat son of a bitch, you killed the president." And as the officer seized Ruby and got him down on the ground, he says, "Oh, you know me. I'm Jack Ruby." Well, who is Jack Ruby? What does that name mean in Dallas, Texas? Are the officers supposed to say, "Oh, we're sorry, Jack, just go on about your business"? Is that what he meant? He was such an important character in Dallas, Texas, that he could kill with impunity? You are now getting an insight into Jack Ruby's thinking. So then what does Ruby say after they take him into that basement office? Why, he says, "I hope I killed the son of a bitch. I meant to get off 3 shots, but you all were too fast for me." Indeed, they were too fast for him. It's too bad they weren't faster. These words show a heart, regardless of social duty. Words that show a black, wicked heart. Ruby continued talking. He says, "I shot him because I wanted the world to know that the Jews have some guts." Well, he might phrase it that way, that he wanted the world to know that us Jews had some guts because he had performed his act of infamy in the face of television cameras, which were spreading the news and the picture to the entire universe. Ruby wanted the world to know that us Jews have some guts. That's what Judge Brown means when he says malice may be inferred from acts done and words spoken, and shows a heart regardless of social duty. I happen to recall the words of a brilliant young leader who could not be here today by any possibility, who said, "Ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country." So I ask you this: what has Jack Ruby done for his country now, after professing his great love for President Kennedy? In this country, we have a government of law, not of men, and that means that every person, no matter how vile the crime, no matter how impelling the evidence, will before being punished be presumed innocent. And there, as he was showing all the world that us Jews have guts, he showed that Lee Harvey Oswald couldn't have a trial, and that these basic tenets of American liberty, for which your ancestors and my ancestors have died and bled, have become meaningless at the hands of Jack Ruby. He was sane then, and he is sane today. He was guilty then, and he is guilty today. The blood is still red on the hands of Jack Ruby. Thank you very much.
Back outside the courtroom now, where camera crews have created a bottleneck in an already packed area of downtown Dallas. This trial has been going on the past 9 or 10 days around the corner from the Texas School Book Depository and up the road from where President Kennedy was assassinated. People from all corners of the world have come to either see the site or to pay their respects. Now people have gathered to be a part of this trial. You've heard defense counsel Phil Burleson argue that just because you didn't go see President Kennedy's motorcade, well, that doesn't mean you're not a patriot. That defending the prosecution's point that if Jack Ruby loved the president so much, why didn't he go see him? Also, he argued that there were a lot of people who wanted to see Lee Harvey Oswald, not just Jack Ruby. Then Prosecutor Watts brought up the point that whatever you think of Oswald, if you think he killed Kennedy or not, he deserved his day in court. He is and was innocent until proven guilty, and Jack Ruby ripped that right away from Oswald by preventing a trial. Let's go back into the courtroom with Eric Bushman standing by.
All right, Brandon, we are now going to get a show. Joe Tannehill from Jasper, Texas, is about to argue for the defense. If anyone has been entertaining throughout this trial, including being fined by Judge Brown for breaking a pencil that then struck Brown's bench, it has been Tannehill. And here he is.
May it please the court, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, we're down now to the last part of this trial, which in effect, in some respects, has been somewhat of a physical ordeal for each and every one of us. You've been here long, you have listened patiently, with great sincerity, with great interest, evidence of the appreciation of the great responsibility that is reposed in you, the discharge of your duty in your state, your nation, your neighbors in this court. I've heard this man say, Mr. Bill Alexander, say to you, now do you do your duty as jurors? That shocks me, as I feel certain that it shocks you, asking you to infer malice that this state has failed to adduce. That shocks me. But to tell you that you must do your duty in keeping with your oath as jurors, what kind of people do they think you are to tell you? You are summoned here, you held up your hands, and by all that is holy, swore the true verdict. You would render according to the law and evidence. And when you did that, ladies and gentlemen, when you laid your hand and took the oath, you and each and every one of you shook hands with the Lord. And for them to tell you, you do your duty, to even go further than that and tell you, I want to read it to you just like he said it. By Mr. Alexander, he said, I'm not going to try to defend Oswald. He loved life, just like you do. Mr. Alexander says that Oswald loves life, just like you do. I never thought I would live long enough to hear a prosecuting attorney or anybody tell a jury to tell any 12 people in Texas that Oswald loved that they love because he's the only Texan that I know of that repudiated crime.
Judge, we object to that. There's nothing in evidence of that.
Do you deny it?
Let's stay in the evidence.
Let's stay in the evidence. We will stay in the four corners of that statement for a moment. How in the name of fairness, common decency, can anyone stand here before you and tell you that Oswald loved life as you 12 men loved life? Shocking, disbelieving, disturbing. I can't express my feelings other than to say it's greatly disturbing to hear that from a fellow lawyer from a Texan. But doesn't it make you wonder where the wolf and wolf comes from in this case? That what is the motive behind all this? He says, while all the world watches us. Now, what have they tried to do in this case? And what are they trying to do in this case? This case of this Jack Ruby, this GI, this patriot, who Bill Alexander in his subconscious mind referred as Jack, our good friend, our neighbor. They would have you send a sick man suffering from psychomotor epilepsy to a penal institution to gratify nothing but political ambition, embarrassment, humiliation, a need to satisfy, a desire to satisfy, an urge to satisfy, an innate feeling of frustration. And it has come out throughout this trial time and time again. They referred to Oswald as the defendant. They're not thinking of Jack Ruby in this case. They're on trial themselves before the world, and they're so overcome with this great, this deliberate, this desire, and this demand that you do something to Jack Ruby to make up for this great political opportunity that Mr. Wade might have to prosecute Lee Harvey Oswald. Now, what are they trying to do? Let's go back. Let's go back to the time that Jack Ruby was born. An extremely large child, in all probability, suffered from a head injury during birth. Maybe not. Maybe he did. Maybe the injuries that he's received may have been produced by latent and dormant injury to the brain that became aggravated as time went along. From these serious head injuries, these pistol whippings, and these unconscious periods he has had. First, it impaired his personality, damaged his personality, superimposed with his head injuries of his condition at birth. This violent nature that was developing through the years, the morbidity of the impaired personality, the despondency that is coming along, developing down through the years, going from job to job, from place to place. So we come down to 1952, when Jack goes into the Cotton Bow Hotel, and he holds up for about a month. Failure, depressed, and depressed. He has these swing moods of exhilaration to depression, depression to exhilaration. Violent over this thing, little trivial things, contemplating suicide, taking his own life, going to Dr. Silverman, crying like a baby, saying, "Nobody loves me, just my little children here." Seward calls his little children dogs, and he flies into a rage. He says, "You shouldn't let your dog lick your hand when it's bleeding like that. Go get some medicine." He's just wild. He goes wild. And the prosecution takes this sick mind and they distort it, asking you to supply the evidence and the malice that they couldn't bring you, asking you to take this man's life, a sick man. And that disturbs me that my fellow men here, my brother lawyers, are so wrought up in this thing that they feel so deeply that they have to get somebody as a substitute for Lee Harvey Oswald. But they can't convert Lee Harvey Oswald into Jack Ruby. They can't do that because Jack Ruby has definitely been described as a sick man with a sick mind, incapable of cool, calculative, premeditated, cold-blooded murder. Cold-blooded murder of Lee Harvey Oswald. Yet they say he wanted to live and love life like you do. Like you do. They would tell you and have you believe that Lee Harvey Oswald wanted to be a good Dallas County citizen, God-fearing, as you people are. They would tell you, take Lee Harvey Oswald by the hand and walk with him.
Judge, we object to that. Didn't anybody say anything about taking him by the hand and walking with him?
Stay in the record.
Judge, that's a fair inference from the facts and their contentions. They would have you say to the world, "Yes, Mr. District Attorney, you're right. The president was killed in Dallas by Lee Harvey Oswald. Yes, Mr. District Attorney, you do that. You show the world that you can do a whole lot more to Jack Ruby, a sick man, than what he did to America when he killed John Fitzgerald Kennedy and J.D. Tippit and nearly killed John Connally. You do that." Do you know what kind of testimony they would have to supply the malice in this case with? That's one thing I want to call your attention to about these peace officers. There are peace officers and there are peace officers. But you will find that the youngsters are the ones that will supply the district attorney with the so-called Ray Jesti evidence. You don't find that in men like Graves. He didn't get any of that Ray Jesti testimony from Graves, and he was right on top of it. He was the closest man to him. He wasn't as close as Ike Pappas, who had the mic that could pick up Henry Wade's voice from way up there, and he had it right in front of him when he went by, and Ike didn't pick up anything. You heard the tape. But they'd have you stand or fall. They've got to stand or fall on the lawsuit, on the McMillan boys' testimony. They've got to go with him, and they've chose to go with him. Now, where does he stand with the record? Where does he stand with the truthfulness of the evidence? He wrote a written report that very day of what he saw and what he knew about the shooting in longhand, mind you, in his handwriting. And do you know how many times he corrected it? 18. 18 corrections. And you know that he didn't say one thing in there about malice?
We object to that. We offered that in evidence, and they wouldn't let it in evidence.
Mr. Belli pointed out to him that he had 18 corrections in it.
Mr. Belli pointed out that he scratched a word out and started the sentence differently.
Boy, they're hurting now, aren't they? They're hurting now, Judge. He didn't have one thing in there about malice.
Stay in the record.
Well, he's testifying now, Your Honor.
Maybe you want to get up here, Mr. Wade, and tell this jury how that boy McMillan, looking completely away from Jack Ruby, said he saw him come up with a gun and that here he is looking away from him. Maybe you'd like to get up there. They've got to stand and fall with McMillan, and McMillan lied in his teeth because he didn't see what he swore on that witness stand that he saw, because he couldn't see. And he's the strike they're branded with. This is the perjury that Mr. Wade must digest and ask you to digest, in his demand that you do your duty in keeping with your oath to Lee Harvey, who had the right and wanted to live like you want to live. And his demand that you go out here and bring him in a verdict of guilty against a very, very sick man with psychomotor epilepsy that has been demonstrated by the greatest scientists in the subject of the world. Mr. Tyler of Galveston, Roy Schaefer of Yale, Manfred Guttmacher of Baltimore, and Frederick Gibbs of Chicago, the greatest scientists in the world. And shocked I was at the uncouth, unsavory, ungentlemanly, undignified, and untexan conduct on the part of Henry Wade when he tried to dog Mr. Schaefer like he was a mad calf or an irresponsible puppy dog, snapping at him, insulting him. Let's talk a minute about what happened just before the shooting. Jack goes to the parking lot. He has little Sheba in his car with him. He said, "You just behave, I'll be back." He sends that money to Little Lynn. He sees those people there, likes crowds. He's a guy that likes to associate around with people, like Henry Wade, and do favors for his friend Henry Wade.
No, we object to that. Jack Ruby hasn't done any favors.
Well, Sam Pate said that Henry Wade was looking at nobody but Jack when Ruby called Oswald was brought out there, Judge. There's evidence here that Jack Ruby got Mr. Wade an interview with that man.
Judge, I've nodded at some 100,000 people in my life that I don't know.
Well, you've had a good luck there, Hank. I voted for you.
Mr. Tannehill, please address your remarks to the jury.
Yes, Judge. Also, you have this picture of this hand and the wrong finger there. Now I'll come to the point of this great, great burden the state has got to prove there's malice in the mind of Jack Ruby. The state has the burden to prove to you that there was a conspiracy in the police department with Jack Ruby.
Judge, we object to that. Did you hear what he said? He said there was...
I hope he heard what I said, and I sure hope this jury heard it.
Judge, he just told the jury that we had to prove Jack Ruby was in a conspiracy with the Dallas Police Department.
That's right!
Disregard, members of the jury.
We don't have to prove anything on that, and I wish you struck the jury on it.
Members of the jury, disregard.
Why do they want to do that? Why? Because Jack Ruby's skill added to Henry Wade's belt would mean something. Maybe. Maybe not. I don't know. Bill Alexander likes to travel. He would like to see the rolling hills and the bluebonnets and the dogwoods and the tall pines over in East Texas on his way to Huntsville to watch the execution. And he'd do that. He'd go over there. He'd watch it. And he'd love it. He would dearly love it, enjoy, and you've watched his eyes, his tarantula-like eyes, and seen the terrific pleasure that he would derive if you give him the death sentence. Before I sit down, I'd like to say what a privilege it is to work in this case with my friend, Mel Belli. I didn't have a brother, and I consider him my brother. A great man to sit at the elbow of, a wonderful humanitarian, a kind, thoughtful, considerate man.
Judge, I don't think that's in the record either. What a great man Mr. Belli is. We object to it.
Sustained. Wrap it up, Mr. Tannehill.
Thank you, Judge. I know our trails will cross again, and I hope they will. I hope it won't be long. I just want to look at you for a minute.
Mr. Tannehill, please stop staring at the jurors.
I see great courage in your eyes. I have great faith that you will rise to the occasion. Thank you.
We're here outside the courtroom now as Judge Brown has allowed for a short recess and it looks like Joe Tannehill is going to speak to one of the journalists following his remarks to the jury. It looks like he's going up to WFAA newsman Bob Walker. Let's listen in on their conversation.
This is Bob Walker again at the Dallas County Courthouse with defense attorney Joe Tannehill from Jasper, Texas. We're in a 15-minute recess right now. There's a reason we have the pleasure of having Mr. Tannehill on. Mr. Tannehill has just finished an hour and 8 minutes. Joe, I don't know whether you timed it or not, but I did. An hour and 8 minutes of summation in behalf of the defense. Joe, would you tell me exactly what you attempted to do in your summation? Were you there to refute, or what were you there to do?
Well, I didn't attempt to speak an hour and 8 minutes. If I'd have known I was speaking that long, Bob, I'd have sat down a long time ago. I attempted, however, to refute some of the things that I felt that were unwarranted statements by the men who preceded me for the state. I thought that there were some very definite positions that they had taken that were untenable, and I wanted to point that out. But the most important consideration that motivated, I suppose, the hour and 8 minute discussion was an effort to explain the facts and our complicated defense and the law pertaining to it. And I do hope that during that hour and 8 minutes I achieved something in that regard, because we're dealing with a very rare disease in this psychomotor variant epilepsy. And it's not easy to explain, not easy to understand, but we do have an intelligent jury, one that will not be swayed by emotion, and that's one thing I did not indulge in like you generally do in some personal injury cases over in the East Woods. You do get a little emotional, and I didn't get emotional.
I was going to remark that. No, that was purposeful. You did not intend, in other words, to have an emotional direct appeal to the jury.
Absolutely not. Anything but an emotional appeal to this jury. This jury is too sophisticated and too intelligent to tolerate emotional appeals.
Mr. Tannehill, are you confident right now? How do you feel it's going?
I feel that as I always felt, we'd be much happier with the trial away from Dallas because of the inbuilt subconscious pressures on these people. But, you know, we could be wrong, Bob, about this jury. We could have misguessed the sizzling feeling that was going on here because of the many multiple problems involved: the Kennedy assassination, the shooting of the man that assassinated him, the embarrassment of Dallas, the so-called image, the castigation that these Yankee newspaper writers have put on Dallas, and the idea that maybe a Dallas jury should convict Ruby to prove that Dallas is a law-abiding town, particularly in view of the fact that Oswald was shot in the Dallas police station. I was tremendously impressed with the very sincere and acute attention and on everything that was being said and done by this before this jury. They were very attentive, very conscientious, and they're very intelligent. And right now, I just don't believe that they're going to be taken in by all this hogwash that surrounds this case. This is just a trivial murder case. If this case were over in Jasper,
your hometown, right?
My hometown, the bond would be about $2,500, and it would probably be an agreed plea for the man to go to the asylum and get treatment. If it didn't have all this swirling propaganda around it, you know, to try to recreate Oswald so that they'll have a news victim.
Mr. Tannehill, it's 20 after 11 now. We have 3 more people to go. We have Jim Bowie, Henry Wade for the state, and Melvin Belli for the defense. What's your estimation? What time is it going to go to the jury tonight?
I have an idea that the judge will instruct the jury that they can deliberate if they want to, that they can select a foreman and go to bed. He's going to leave it up to the jury to decide, and I suspect that the case will get to the jury about 2 o'clock in the morning, and that's a new one for me, too. Is that a new one in Dallas, 2 o'clock?
Has to be.
Has to be.
Thank you, Mr. Tannehill, for coming down here on this
Bob,
recess.
I'd like to say to you that I saw you testify in court. You were forthright. You were unbiased. You were neutral. You were not trying to shade your testimony for either side. You got up and gave the facts as you remembered them and as you saw them, and I thought you did a very commendable job, and you're a great credit to this community. I have a lot of respect for you.
Thank you, Mr. Tannehill. Thank you for those words.
That was hulking Joe Tannehill talking to Channel 8's Bob Walker. Let's go back in the courtroom and Eric Bushman.
Well, Brandon, we expect a total of 3 more speakers tonight, and Tannehill's partner, the lead defense attorney from California, will be up after we hear again from the prosecution. Here's Prosecutor Jim Bowie making his way to the jury box.
May it please this honorable court, gentlemen of the defense, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I too wish to thank you on behalf of the state of Texas for your services as jurors during these long and very trying hard days for you. I know that you have been removed from your homes. You have been deprived of your freedom, your movements, your freedom of speech, and have not gone to your churches nor your employment. I don't know what Mr. Tannehill's complaint is about you doing your duty as jurors. You have before you what is the foundation of American government. I've heard so many objections that we are depriving somebody of his constitutional rights. Our Bill of Rights and the Constitution of the United States are the finest states' rights ever developed by human mind. The foundation of this country is not supported by those who ask only rights. They must meet their responsibility in keeping the law in the eyes of these rights. It is easy for you to meet responsibility because justice lies in the court's charge in following the law. And it is how you define justice and is received by performing your duty as a juror by following the law as written by His Honor, Judge Brown. Mr. Tannehill comes up and he brings forth a second defense, which is the oldest defense. If you can't defend the defendant, prosecute the prosecutor. Lying policeman, oh, I'm shocked about what's going on. Oh, this terrible. Your job, ladies and gentlemen, is to determine whether or not he knew the difference between right and wrong and the consequences of his act. They say to you they brought the world's most outstanding psychiatrists, neurologists, pathologists, and whatever they all are. I'm not familiar with all those great long titles. And only 2 have actually testified that Jack Ruby did not know the difference between right and wrong and the consequences of his act. Dr. Guttmacher and Dr. Bromberg. Dr. Guttmacher, on cross-examination, was asked if he knew what he was doing, if he intended to kill, if he acted purposefully, if he remembered the killing. Then, Doctor, would you change your mind? And their own doctor says, yes, if that were proven to me, I'd say he was sane. And Dr. Guttmacher hasn't heard one thing about the evidence. He hasn't heard one thing of what transpired down at City Hall, nor has he tried to find out. He said he was down there, and he measured the distance that Jack told him about, and he thought it was a little farther than what Jack did. And when he was down there, did he go ask one police officer about what happened? We developed through his doctors what Ruby recalls and what he does not recall, 2 different things. When he recalls that he was despondent, that's good. When he recalls what is something bad, something that hurts Ruby, well, that's just confabulation. In other words, someone must give him that I would have shot him 3 times, but I didn't because they grabbed my arm. But when it comes down to something Ruby remembered that might help him, we use a different terminology for that. That is the doctor's beautiful aisle of memory that helped Jack Ruby. From one of those aisles, we get this. I always carry a gun in my hip pocket. I always carried it. Well, according to Dr. Guttmacher, that explains why he had the gun. Guttmacher accepts it. But Mr. Howard, who has known Ruby for years, said, I have never seen him carry a gun in my life. If he had it, he kept it in his bag where he kept his money or in the glove compartment. I have never seen it, though. Old George Senator, who's known Ruby since childhood, he didn't say he carried a gun all the time. Oh, no. And neither did Alice Nichols, his girlfriend. She had never seen him carry a gun. But Dr. Guttmacher, their doctor, accepted it verbatim. Now then, Mr. Belli, in his opening arguments to you, stated except for the fact that the little girl, Kathy Kay, phoned, Ruby wouldn't have been at Western Union Store in downtown. But Kathy Kay said when I phoned Jack, he said, I was going to town. I had to go town anyway. So we know that he was going to town besides ever going to the store to send the money. Belli said in his opening statement, we will prove that he had that money to pay some back taxes that he owed. But on Sunday morning, I venture to say there isn't a soul in the world that goes to town on Sunday morning at 11 a.m. to pay back taxes. No, I would say he left home intending to kill a man, and the cash he had in his hip pocket was for bond money. We played Jack Ruby's murder live on film. We have to run it slow motion, but it happened as you saw on the film that was run, in order and regular time, and you know what time it took. When we asked Dr. Bromberg this hypothetical, assume Jack Ruby left Western Union and went down, calm. He got in the crowd, and then he jumped out and says, you rat son of a bitch, and then pulls the trigger. Would you say he was sane or insane at the time, if you knew those facts were true? And he said, I'd change my conclusion. I'd change my conclusion. Have they met their burden to prove to you he is legally insane? No, of course they haven't. So what happened? Well, let's see what we can say about malice and what happened down there that day. We know that on Friday night, Jack Ruby was at City Hall in the assembly room, and he said, "I first thought about killing him when I saw Oswald there that night." Here is his intent. Here is when he decided he would kill. And he had the means. He had that .38 Cobra pistol, and he put it in his pocket. Not only had the mind to kill at the time, but he had the means to kill and the ability. But he lacked one thing, the opportunity. That's all he lacked. That's all he needed. And when he went down to City Hall, 10:30 in the morning, well before the murder, he goes to the TV unit and says, "When are they bringing him out?" "Oh, maybe Mr. Tannehill. It was a conspiracy with all the TV that you get talking about and not with the police department. How ridiculous can you get?" 2 times Ruby says, "Have they brought him out?" He's looking for him. He walks down the Western Union after sending the wire this 396 feet, calm. Was that when he was having his seizure, Mr. Tannehill? Calm down the street. But he was a large baby who came from a foster home, so that's why he was about to have a seizure. Let me say this. At that time, he got the intent. He has the pistol. He has everything he needs but the opportunity. And then Officer Sam Pierce, according to Ruby, drove out the patrol car, and he slipped in, and he kept going. And he got down to the basement, and lo and behold, to his surprise, his glory, as Dr. Bromberg said, he wants to be the martyr. He wants to be the Messiah. He wants to be the anointed one. And there he is, the Messiah. He got the mind to kill, the ability to kill, and here is his opportunity. And did he take it? You know he did. The whole world knows he did. What do we have here? We have a vicious murder. I say to you, there is something here much more important than you and I and Jack Ruby. It's the law. It's the law of this state. And it is one of the most important ones because it protects human life. It deters others. The law is against murder. And the state of Texas today is no stronger than the weakest heart that sits on this jury. I ask you to perform your duties without apology. I ask you, as responsible citizens of this community, to write out a verdict that will show this state, this county, this land, and this world that it is a law-abiding community. We do not allow the murder to occur here of a shackled man. I ask you in good faith, in sincerity, in all deep honesty. You told us during jury selection that if the facts and circumstance warrant a verdict of death, that you would write that verdict. We believed you then. I believe you now. Thank you very much.
Well, there you have it. Outside the courtroom again, where night has fallen but crowds remain. Just a few days ago, we had that jailbreak right outside, which added some more drama to an already infamous acre of land. While Joe Tannehill argued Jack Ruby was a sick man grieving over the loss of the President of the United States, Bowie just countered that it was a simple opportunity to kill. Ruby making his way into the basement right before the opportunity to make it into the history books. Now, the final 2 speakers as this March 13th makes its way into March 14th. Eric, are we ready?
Yes, we are. The 2 leads are about to present their final summation. The 2 men who led their respective teams. First, lead defense attorney Melvin Belli, a noted attorney known for shooting a cannon off the roof of his office to signal victory in his personal injury cases, among other things. He graduated from the University of California at Berkeley with a law degree from Bolt Hall School of Law. And here he is now.
May it please you, my brother Tannehill, and may it please your honor, and may it please you officers of the state, and may it please you ladies and gentlemen of the jury. My mother always told me when I came to a strange place, if I was treated graciously, to thank my host, and then I do that first. I have been treated graciously here, from high to low, from the taxi cab drivers to the waitresses, to everybody in your community. And my mother also told me not to be a hypocrite in that which I said. You know that I have said to you that I felt it was difficult for you to sit on the jury because of the events that happened here and because perhaps of an unconscious pride that you may have in your city. But let us see now in the beginning small hours of the morning, when great discoveries in the history of the world has been made in garrisons and basements, if here in a temple of justice we can't rediscover something that was never lost in your great city of Dallas, that we may rediscover justice. You've heard everybody, from the weird beard to the great Dr. Gibbs. How shall you know who to believe in this great assembly of scientific men? Well, there is one test. If there was a little one in the crib at home convulsing, you'd ask, who shall we send this child to? Would you be satisfied with the ultimate opinion as to life or death, with the opinion of anyone less than the man to whom they send the encephalograms from all over the world? You'd want that man to look. You'd want the man who invented the EEG test. That's your answer as to who you should believe. When they look back at us in history in 40, 50, 100 years as we are trying to fathom into this man's brain, trying to determine whether this man was sick, whether he was well, whether he did an act that was responsible or was irresponsible, maybe they'll laugh at us in retrospect as we laughed at those who practiced what they called medicine 100 years ago. Why, they didn't even know the classifications of the blood at the beginning of the century. Tonight, you can rediscover the justice of science and the law. Do you know what we found in this lawsuit in your state of Texas? Probably for the first time, and against the criticism of my brothers of the bar, I marched this man, Jack Ruby, before laboratory work and EEG work so that we could all see what I was so sure that we would find. He has organic brain damage. Dr. Schaefer and Dr. Guttmacher both said the same thing. If you get EEG tests, it will show up. Dr. Towler, your own Texas, read the EEG and said, this is what we have. We have psychomotor variant type of epilepsy given to rage states. Corroborative, conclusively, of the psychological testing, proof that this man is sick. We asked Dr. Gibbs alone, from this EEG test alone, could you make the diagnosis psychomotor epilepsy? He said, unmistakably, by looking at these tracings, you could. These tracings hold a man's life, his years, his freedom. No one was down at City Hall that Sunday morning when the fates conspired against Jack Ruby. You saw the shooting on television. No one peered into this man's mind. But Dr. Gibbs, he sat on the stand and raised his hand to God. He came here without fee, expense, or anything else, and swore to tell the truth about the test he spent his life on. I submit to you a case has never been proved as clearly, as openly as we have proved in this case, that this man, Jack Ruby, has organic brain damage. Texas law takes murder, cold-blooded murder with malice, all the way down from the electric chair to, I think, 2 years and a suspended sentence. That is the range for an ordinary human being under the stress of those tragic 3 days. When I say that, it must run through your own minds how you felt on that day in November, what your feelings were when the man who led the country was assassinated, and the assassin still at large and shooting police officers. What were your feelings? As I look to you, each of you must think of something different in the president's career. I think of the first time he stood in front of the Berlin Wall and said, I'm a Berliner. I'm a Berliner, with his tousled hair flying in the wind. In that case, for any individual with a normal breaking point, if he did what Jack Ruby did, I could stand before a jury like you and ask under Texas law that you suspend the sentence because of the tragedy of the 3 days. That's the first situation. And I often say to myself, with this event that happened here, had I been there, had I been so situated, but for the grace of God and a stronger constitution of mind, could go I. Let's take the second situation, the case of a man who does not have a normal personality like you and I do. This is the case of the man with an unstable personality. In the old days, we used to call them, what? The village clown? The village idiot? All fine until there's trouble, and then it goes out, who do you suspect the most? Who would do such a thing like this? The man who is always around the police station, bringing coffee. The man who brings the donuts, the sandwiches, who can be sent out for the cold beer. Publicity he wants. Publicity he seeks. Ah, ladies and gentlemen, I suppose that before the handful of dust settles down on the plain to be scratched by the dancing tumbleweed, that we'd all like to engrave our initials in some oak tree. Some of us are even engraved at Mount Rushmore. Some of us who do the immortal Shakespeare graze elegy in the churchyard. I think it's a part of our craving to seek after some bit of immortality. This poor sick fellow has a brittle personality. There cannot be any doubt about that. God forgive us, for we know not what we do when we fracture the brittle personality. If the man with the brittle personality did what Jack Ruby did, you'd suspend the sentence or outright acquit him. Now we come to the third category. If you're doubtful as to the first, the normal individual under the stress of that weekend who should get a suspended sentence. And if you're doubtful as to the second, the unstable personality who should get a suspended sentence or an acquittal, I bring you the third category. The man who not only has the unstable, brittle personality, plus the psychomotor epilepsy, you would beyond suspended sentence and find him not guilty by reason of insanity. You in this city are too sophisticated to be sidetracked by what Mr. Alexander mocks as psychomotor pool. We know that there is the science of psychiatry, of psychology, and electroencephalograms. You can't ridicule science anymore. Here you have an honest-to-God blackout. But for the call that morning, Jack Ruby would not have been downtown at all if he had not been sent that little Lynn $25. He was going back to his car. He left the dog in the car. His cleaning woman was coming in the afternoon. He walks down the ramp, and this lid was on him, like so many of us in the world, and it was coming off. He goes down the ramp, the conspiracy, the time, the place, the event, the leering face comes out that he had seen before. He had the opportunity to have this many times before, but he didn't. The lid was on. He comes out leering. There's the pop of the flashlight, and then the shooting. And it's awfully important to remember that Ruby's hand was convulsing even after he shot. Even though he didn't have anything against the police officers, his hand was still convulsing. Archer, I'm not going to call a policeman a liar or a perjurer. Archer, the one who said that Jack had told him, I intended to shoot him 3 times. Do you think I was going to let that SOB get by with it? I'm going to ask you if you'll go back to that time that there was the official investigation, and Archer was asked to write out everything that happened on the shooting of Lee Harvey Oswald. In that affidavit, there is not one word of anything that Jack is reported to have said when Archer was on the stand. You can examine that statement from November and then compare it with the one he gave in court after talking with the district attorney 4 or 5 times. Not one word back then, only now. That is a reasonable doubt. This dovetails to the task you are going to embark on before long. I've suggested 3 categories. I've told you the category that this man is in. I ask with all the sincerity in my command that you bring back a verdict that you will all be proud of. That everybody within the reach of our voice can say, we have wedded science and law. And as I said at the very beginning of this discussion, I'm against lynch law, but I'll stand before you as long as you'll tolerate me to argue against putting a man in Bedlam who has a personality disorder and who has epilepsy. Jack Ruby does not belong in a prison. Acquit him. Not guilty by reason of insanity. Give him a just and fair verdict compatible with modern science. That's what the world wants to see in justice from this community. You're an intelligent jury, and I do not butter you up. I tell you, use your God-given intelligence in this case. They will look back on this verdict 40, 50, maybe even 80 years from now. They may laugh at us, what we're doing with these poor tools that we have at our command, but don't stigmatize the character, the village clown, or whatever you will, a sick man, by any jail sentence or any suspended sentence. Be true unto yourselves and remember those 3 categories. If he were in the first, you'd apply the Texas law and suspend the sentence. If you were in the second, you'd suspend the sentence or acquit him. But in the third, with the personality disorder and the psychomotor epilepsy, you'd send him where he belongs. And as I started, thank you. Thank all of you for your attention.
The final summation from the defense team for Jack Ruby is complete. Their arguments are done for this trial. Now, because the state has the burden of proof, just like they started arguments, they will finish. It is late. It is well past midnight on March 14th. The jury charge conference that began early in the day of March 13th seemed like a lifetime ago. Let's go back inside the courtroom for the final act.
An already exhausted Dallas County District Attorney Henry Wade, who has been a native of the District Attorney's office for over 15 years with a past life with the FBI, must give the performance of his life so far. Here he is for what we expect to be the final remarks to the jury before deliberations.
Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I know you are tired, and I'm tired, and everybody else is tired. I appreciate your services, and I'm going to cut my arguments shorter than I anticipated. You know these arguments are supposed to be helpful to jurors in analyzing the facts of the case. I'm going to hurriedly run through. Mr. Belli made great note of the fact that they marched him up to take these electroencephalographs. Well, they didn't march him up and let him talk to the psychiatrist that we brought in to see him. They didn't march him in and let him talk to our doctors about what went on out there. They don't even talk about Dr. Schaefer. You know Dr. Schaefer is the one that said there's no indication of any depression at this time when he examined him on the psychological. He made a big point in trying to straighten you all out by saying that Dr. Walker said it could show, but he didn't tell you that Dr. Walker told you it didn't show a number of times. He asked about Captain Fritz here. The only question that was asked about that was an officer, and he says, well, did he say do what? He asked that, and the officer said he didn't hear anything of the kind. He mentions confabulation, or whatever that word is, and about the, I hope the SB dies. Someone might have said that, and he might remember, but he didn't mention the other thing. I hope I killed the SOB. Nobody said they killed him I know of other than Ruby. He also said that 2 nights before, I thought I would kill him. He also said, I meant to get off 3 shots. Where could they have heard that, even under his theory of confabulation? I don't think he's trying to help you, and I hope that I am. You don't have any insanity in this case. You may have a weak personality. You may have an unstable personality. You may have an emotional person, but you don't have a person that is insane under the law. This is an effort to create sympathy from you as jurors. There's a lot of things. I'm not going to review all that testimony. You know that he is presumed, as he sits there now, or as he started off and at the time of this incident, that he was a sane man. You know that the burden was on them to prove it by a preponderance of the evidence. We have brought you more evidence than they did on it. They put their 2 family doctors on, and not either one of them would testify a thing about it. And don't you know they would know a lot about him? Now they keep saying they don't agree with lynch law, and I want to get everything right on the table before you're in a hurry here. He says that a normal person should have a suspended sentence if he killed the accused assassin of the president. You have a more involved thing than an ordinary murder. You have our whole law involved. When Jack Ruby sitting here shot and killed Lee Harvey Oswald, he not only committed murder, but he told the world and he told everybody that they don't believe in democracy. They don't believe a man is presumed to be innocent. You know, Mr. Tannehill mentioned big about the communists, about the whole world would be happy if you turned him loose. You can bet your life's dollar the communistic world would be happy. They would like for us to do like they do over in Russia, and they execute them on the spot. They don't believe in jury trials. They don't believe in presuming anybody innocent. They convicted Oswald here when all of you know he is presumed to be innocent. Although whether he killed a man or not, I'm not saying. The communists would be happy to know that you could commit murder of a handcuffed man in police custody and walk out a free man. I don't think you're interested in that. Let's get down to the malice of the case here. You have a man that 2 days before decided to kill him. You have premeditation. You have malice. You have from that moment on him thinking about it. And you have him up here at KLIF talking to them there. And when he gets through, gives him a pamphlet on heroism. You have him the next afternoon trying his best to get right here by the jail down to where they were going to move Oswald. You have him talking about it back and forth. They would have you say he went down to send that telegram. But the evidence has him over on Commerce Street sometime after 10:30 asking a television man, have they moved him yet? And coming back later and saying, have they moved him yet? They would like for you to think he is the village idiot, but that is not the case. You have a man that armed himself with a pistol, and the psychiatrist took his word that everybody in Dallas carried a pistol, that he carried it to protect money. When the evidence here before you shows that Jack Ruby had $300 at home, $700 in the car, and some $2,000 in his pocket, a checking account in a bank, his place of business closed, and no reason whatever to be carrying that money around. That money may have been the reason or excuse for having the gun. He had malice. You have a cold-blooded killing. You have a killing here that could be no more malicious. A man handcuffed, an innocent man under the law, presumed to be innocent, regardless what he was, and taking the law into his own hands. Other than this, to turn this man loose, you would set civilization back a century. You would set it back to barbarianism. You would set it back to lynch law and say that anybody that I have decided should be killed, I can kill. That's what you're doing when you put that stamp of approval on this. Ruby robbed the people of Dallas of knowing more about Oswald.
Objection!
Your Honor, he killed him, didn't he? What I was going to say is that it robbed them of the right to try Oswald, what I was getting ready to say. Well, I said that's what I have got written down here. Robbed him of the right for the city of Dallas to try Oswald. It robbed him of the right to see whether anyone helped him or not. It robbed him of a lot of things. You and I, not only of Dallas, but of the whole nation. Jack Ruby was a glory seeker. You don't have to look far in the evidence to find that he was a glory seeker. He wanted the limelight. He wanted publicity. He wanted heroism and fame. And he wanted to go down in history as the man that killed an alleged assassin. And my question to you, ladies and gentlemen, what would you want the history book to say about you? Do you want them to say that you tried this case and slapped the man on the wrist and gave him a little penitentiary sentence? Do you want history to go down in the books and say that you, if I am intimidating any of you, I didn't mean to, but what do you want history to say about any of your verdict?
Object to the form of that argument.
Judge, I wish you'd tell him to be quiet. There's nothing wrong with that argument. What do you want to say about Jack Ruby? Do you want to say that you fell for Dr. Belli's testimony here about the encephalograph there? Even the two doctors that he brings on, both Tyler and Gibbs, neither one had any opinion as to whether he was sane or insane. All they're looking at is the tracings over there that even their psychiatrist didn't pay any attention to. I don't think you want history to say that you, as jurors and citizens, don't believe in that sort of thing, in your community and mine. That you believe in upholding the law of this community and this state and this nation. And I believe that you do. Defense lawyers usually, as in this case, try to try everyone but the defendant. They would like to try the Dallas police. They would like to try me, the district attorney's office. They would like to try Dallas or anybody they could to get your mind off of the defendant, their guilty defendant. But you know law enforcement is a chain. Law enforcement involves a lot of things. You have your people that make our law, and provide what the penalties are. You have your various police agents that go about, maybe the Dallas police. Maybe they did make some mistakes in this, but I think it is a fine police department. You have the court, Judge Brown, and the court. You have your penal system, and you have your district attorney's office. But ladies and gentlemen of the jury, our laws are no stronger than its weakest link. And in this case, it is you 12 jurors. You are the ones that are going to put a price on this sort of thing. You put an approval or a price. And our laws against murder of a handcuffed and manacled man is no stronger than the weakest heart on this jury. The weakest heart on this jury can set what we think about this type of murder. When we took you on this jury, each of you told us that you believed in an aggravated case, that you could and would quote the death penalty. I believed you then, and I believe you now. They mentioned duty and responsibility here a time or two. They are very beautiful words, probably the most noble words in our language. And it is very easy for a juror or a citizen to say, "Let George do it. I can't do it myself." Very easy to pass the responsibility and the duty off onto someone else. I know how easy that is, but I don't think you're the type of people. I believe that you can see the responsibility and that you're willing to face it. Jack Ruby and his murder was the judge, the jury, and the executioner. Now he and his lawyers ask you for mercy and sympathy and compassion. I ask you, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, to show Jack Ruby the same mercy and the same compassion and the same sympathy that he showed to Lee Harvey Oswald in your police department and mine. If you do that, you can vote only one verdict, that of guilty of murder with malice and of death. You wonder probably why anybody should give the death penalty, why anybody should give it, why even give a penitentiary sentence. There are a lot of reasons given, but the greatest one is the deterrent to others who would do the same. A deterrent to people who would take the law into their own hands. A deterrent to people that would kill just because someone had mistreated them, maybe a relative or a brother or something. You can write a verdict in this case that will ring out all over this country and this nation and say at least why. At least you individually, 12, don't believe in this sort of thing. And you want the whole world and you want communism to know that we believe in the rule of law here, that we believe that democracy and the Bill of Rights, the things that we have all been raised on, still exist. I appreciate your service as jurors, and I know that you will write a verdict of 12 strong men and women. Thank you.
And with that, the jurors will elect a foreman and retire for a few hours' sleep. They've decided they will start deliberating in the morning, even though it is already well into the morning. The lawyers, the public, and of course the defendant, Jack Ruby, do not know how long they will take to reach a verdict. The only question the lawyers can ask is, did I say the right thing, and was I convincing?
Reporters try to get a quick comment from District Attorney Henry Wade. He wouldn't speak, but he did admit something no lawyer ever admits while waiting for a verdict. He said he wasn't satisfied with his final argument. He was exhausted. So now a few hours sleep until the verdict watch continues.
I'm Eric Bushman.
And I'm Brandon Birmingham. This is the state of Texas versus Jack Ruby, the original trial of the century.
Here's the bibliography for March 13th. The reading of Bill Alexander's closing arguments is from attorney Leighton D'Antoni. Reading of Phil Burleson's closing arguments is from attorney Nigel Redmond. The reading of Frank Watts' closing argument is from attorney Brian Mitchell. The reading of Joe Tannehill's closing argument is from attorney Toby Shook. The reading of Jim Bowie's closing argument is from Fox 4's Steve Eagar. The reading of former Dallas County District Attorney Henry Wade's closing argument is from current Dallas County District Attorney John Kruse. And the interview with Channel 8's Bob Walker and the real Joe Tannehill is courtesy the Sixth Floor Museum at Dealey Plaza and Wfaa-Tv.